Welcome back. We are going to get into the next stumbling block in our Standing Firm Apologetic Biblical Worldview series, and it's science and Christianity. This is a huge one in our culture, and it's really big with youth as they transition into college, because if you look in the universities, you look at the studies, we've looked at some of the studies where youth are walking away from their faith, and it's happening a lot. And a lot of people, they've taken surveys, they said, what are some of the things that have led you to either deconstruct faith or walk away from your faith or doubt the Bible? And a big one is science. And it's sad because science shows God. The heavens declare the glory of the Lord. And so from general revelation, we understand that science is bringing glory to God when you're looking into the cosmos or microcosm, into the DNA in the cell. So science and Christianity, Psalm 8 says this: when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man, that you care for him. So Scripture is beautiful. It's amazing. God has put all of this for our pleasure, whether it's the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the cosmos. And look at this nebula. This is the Eye of God Nebula. Cool name, huh? Anyways, whether you're looking at the cosmos and these stunningly beautiful images of nebula or stars or planets or gaseous clouds or supernova or all sorts of wild, crazy things going on out there, or you're looking into a microscope, into the whether it's macro or micro, down into huge or small, you're seeing God's design, as we looked about in worldview confusion. We talked about the design argument for God. So, what is going on here with science today? Many people in our culture believe that you cannot be both a scientist and a Christian. You need to choose one or the other. Schools, universities, museums, our culture, this false, it's a logical fallacy that you can't be a scientist and a Christian at the same time is inculcated. It's kind of immersed in all parts of culture. Many vocal atheists will belittle anyone who doesn't believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution. So why is that? Well, I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you two books. Here they are. Draper wrote a book, History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, in 1874, and Andrew White, A History of the Warfare of Science with Theology in Christendom, in 1896. Andrew White was a professor at Cornell College, where I grew up back in Ithaca, New York. But these two books were very influential in starting this myth, and it really is a complete myth, that somehow Christianity is opposed to science or scientific discovery. That's a total fallacy myth that's easy to dispel. And so yet, these two, I don't know what their motives were, but these two professors who wrote these books, if you are listening to anybody trying to make the case that somehow Christianity has been opposed to scientific discovery, they will usually cite one of these two books when they're doing it. And so yet, both of these, neither of these professors were professors in the history of science. They were completely unrelated fields, and they simply wrote these books to rip on Christianity. It's silly. In fact, let me quote to you some actual professors in secular schools. Look at David Lindbergh, Professor Emeritus History of Science. Ronald Numbers, Professor History of Science and Medicine at the University of Wisconsin. They write this: despite a developing consensus among scholars that science and Christianity have not been at war, the notion of conflict has refused to die. Why is that, would you say? Well, because sadly, if you have an anti-Christian agenda, it fits your narrative pretty well. So here's some actual scientists with degrees in the history of science, and they're clearly saying from secular schools, there's no history of conflict between Christianity and science. And yet, it's very stunning. If you go back, look at this list of famous scientists. So you can look at fields, whether it's astronomy and Copernicus or Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon established the scientific method. Now you're supposed to believe the scientific method cannot have any, influence from God in the scientific method. There can be no divine influence. And it's like, really, Sir Francis Bacon was a Bible-believing Christian. Whether it's Kepler in mathematics and astronomy, look at Galileo, Descartes, Newton, Boyle, Faraday, Mendel, Calvin, Planck. All of these people were Christians, and the majority of them would be considered Bible-believing evangelical Christians today. And look at these fields of science: chemistry, physics, quantum theory, astronomy, mathematics, all of these philosophers, all of these areas were these fields of study were mostly founded by Bible-believing Christians. And so, of course, there hasn't been a history of war, because it's precisely a Christian worldview that is ordered, that we can go out and it encourages us to look into creation, look into God's amazing handiwork in all of creation. In fact, if you look at a pantheistic worldview, many Native American cultures here, they thought that there were gods and spirits in the trees and all these things, and they thought we'd be dishonoring God if you started to research and do scientific experiments. And so it is precisely a Christian worldview that has allowed scientific discovery to flourish. So, what's the heart of the debate here with science and Christianity? The topic of science and Christianity can be complex, yet it's worth understanding some of these key hearts, right? One of the controversies is teaching about intelligent design along with evolution in school. Many atheists will just lose their minds when it's talked about, well, we should teach intelligent design. And they say, what? You're going to put religion in the schools? No, that violates the separation of church and state. Well, as we've looked at in previous section on history, that's completely hogwash. As we understand, the original intent was there's no such thing as a separation of church and state. And what does the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause, the first of the First Amendment, what does it prevent? Who does it prevent from doing things? Congress shall make no law. It does not prevent. In fact, the founders universally said that Christian churches, ministries, they were under the Free Exercise Clause, and it was illegal for the government to tell any of them, individuals or groups and churches, what they can and can't do. That violated the Free Exercise Clause when they did that. But I digress. So let's jump back into this intelligent design thing. I want to just define our terms here. So let's look at Darwinian evolution versus intelligent design. So biological evolution says this: life arose randomly and began as a single cell bacterium. And then through mutation and natural selection, this bacterium evolved through transitional species into humans. That would be biological evolution, what they believe. Now, what's intelligent design? As far as life is concerned, it shows this: the complexity of life systems shows evidence of a designer. That's it. Don't let anyone deceive you into thinking that intelligent design means that you're going to be busting open the Bible and teaching about who Jesus is and who God is, and you're incorporating, Christianity into the classroom. No, the intelligent design is such a simple and amazingly powerful truth and theory, and it's an accurate theory. Again, the complexity of life systems shows evidence of a designer. That's it. And so when we talk about teaching intelligent design, it's simply a tiny shift in a curriculum. Instead of saying that it's proven, as I'll show you in these first primary source quotes and all of these professors and others who are saying that supposedly naturalistic, atheistic, Darwinian evolution is proven theory. It's not, as a failed theory. And I'm going to show you that they believe, most of the high-level scientists believe that Darwinian evolution is a failed theory, and they don't like the alternative theory of creation and intelligent design, namely, that they flip out about this. So let's look at this. Michael Ruse, in the year 2000, wrote a book, Saving Darwinism from the Darwinians. So he says this: evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it is still true of evolution today. Finally, somebody, an evolutionist, speaking the truth and not trying to hide behind this facade that they think that it's all, perfectly proven and there's no faith in it. In fact, I submit to you right now, it takes orders of magnitude more faith to believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution than in intelligent design, or even more so in creation, and in particular in the God of creation, Jesus Christ. So that's now one thing I want to note here: 99% of the people I quote to you are the highest level whether it's evolutionists, biological evolution, or it'll always be the highest level professors, the ones who write the books, and the highest level Darwinian evolutionists. Why? Because I want to show you the agenda. The agenda is they typically want to hide behind, they're going to tell you that naturalistic Darwinian evolution is proven fact and intelligent design is la-la land and fairy tale. The absolute opposite is true. And so we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through. So, atheist evolutionist Richard Dawkins admits that it takes faith to believe there is no God. He says, of course we can't prove that there isn't a God. Darwinism rejects all supernatural phenomena and causations. So they have this a priori assumption that you cannot have any supernatural phenomena or causations in the Darwinian evolution. And that's silly, because even Sir Francis Bacon, who came up with the scientific method, said, well, of course you can have supernatural. God can come in and influence his creation whenever he wants. Let me show you blind faith in naturalism. Look at this slide. I want to define naturalism here real quickly. Naturalism simply says that what's all the stuff around us in the universe is all that there is. There's only the natural realm. There's no spiritual realm. There's no other, there's nothing out. There's no transcendent God. It's all just the stuff that's here, and that's all there is. But watch this blind faith. Professor Scott Todd said this: even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science. Why? Because it's not naturalistic. That's atheistic. That's the stuff that only matters. So there again, that is blind faith. Look, Darwin himself said this: you go wherever the data points you, wherever it leads you. But what did he just say? No, you don't go. If the data points to intelligent designer, which it does, and all of it does, then you have blind faith in naturalism. It's sad. Well, here's some attacks on intelligent design. Erickson Edwards said this: the core of humanistic atheistic philosophy is naturalism, the proposition that the natural world proceeds according to its own internal dynamics without divine or supernatural control or guidance, and that we human beings are creations of that process. So again, they attack it, they stand on it. Julian Huxley is considered Darwin's bulldog. He says the God hypothesis is becoming an intellectual and moral burden on our thought. We must construct something to take its place. So again, Huxley wrote a book, Religion Without Revelation, in which he espouses an atheistic, naturalistic, that's humanistic worldview. And so this is very important to understand where these attacks came from, and note that it happened back in the 1800s. It was settled. Scientific community and Christianity were almost virtually working together for centuries, for hundreds, and even the last 2 millennia, until very recently. Remember, Charles Darwin wrote his book back in the 1800s, and then Huxley comes along in the end of the 1800s and really pushes this concept of these attacks against intelligent design and wanting to come up with an alternative hypothesis. And they did. That was this atheistic Darwinian evolution. Now, I'm going to get into three main points in this session. We're going to look at three main flaws in Darwinian evolution. Namely, number one, problems in the progenote theory. Now, my wife and I, she is the brainiac of the family, so we did this whole section. So she uses some big words like progenote. So my wife is a PhD from Stanford in environmental microbiology. So she's the brainiac. She comes up with some of these big words, and I'll just help you boil them down. What's progenote? It means first living organism. So what are the problems with the theory of the first living organism? We'll look into that. We'll look into transitional species. Are there transitional species between living, organisms? And then irreducible complexity. And we're going to talk about these flaws. These are three fatal flaws. Any one of them would destroy the theory, but I'm going to show you three of these which will bury Darwinian evolution as a valid theory. And these flaws in Darwinian evolution are rarely even hinted at in schools, textbooks, museums, anywhere in our culture. And yet they are fatal flaws to this theory. First, the problems in the progenote theory. What's this say? What's this first living organism? What this says is your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a single-celled bacterium. Here's this picture of a single-celled bacterium. You can see this life form. It has this flagellum that goes out the back. It's how it moves around, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. But this is out of my wife's, Sarah Williams, her PhD level microorganism biology book, Brock Biology of Microorganisms. So look at this language that they use when it talks about how this first living organism came to be. They said, what was the first self-replicating organism like? This question is impossible to answer. It then goes on to describe in literally fantasy language. One could easily imagine that in the primordial soup, where you had methane and these gases and water and lightning and energy, and all of a sudden, poof, and all the building blocks came together, and it just came into the self-replicating, bacterium. And so that's not science, is first my point here. Okay, this is speculation, and simply they're just imagining in their own imaginary, and they even use that imaginary fantasy language in these PhD level books. Now, consider this. Sir Frederick Hoyle, I mentioned him in the Worldview section. I'm going to get into this more. Who is Sir Frederick Hoyle? He's an astronomer and mathematician. What's going on here? And so in the 1980s, 1970s, he's getting really annoyed about this debate of, is Darwinian evolution probable? Or is there some other theory? And so he said, I'm going to prove this because I know, statistician, and I know how to do this with probability. He says, tell me the building blocks of the simplest bacterium that could have existed and actually still, lived. So the biologists came to Sir Frederick Hoyle. They said, here's the building blocks of the simplest life form. Now we know it's way more complex than that. So he took those building blocks and he just did statistics, probability. He just, all right, what's the possibility that these building blocks could have been put together randomly, random mutation, actually, all this just random getting together, and come up with a bacterium. He said this, the likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter is 1 to a number with 40,000 zeros after it. Look at what he says. It's enough to bury Darwin in the whole theory of evolution. What? Now, I told you I'm only going to quote to you evolutionists, and Sir Frederick Hoyle's an evolutionist. So how does he think life got here if he's absolutely honest here and he's saying it is totally statistically impossible for life to have come from non-life? Now he thinks he thinks this thing is panspermia, which a whole bunch of these people think, that some alien life form, that's what panspermia means, an alien intelligent life form came and seeded a bacterium on planet Earth and then flew off and let that bacterium, through natural random mutation, natural selection, evolve into humankind. And so look at what Hoyle says. The scientific world has been bamboozled into believing that evolution has been proved. Nothing could be further from the truth. And yet, you've been told that it's completely proven fact, or we've been told this ad nauseum over the past 50 to 60 years, but that's about it. 50, 60, 70 years is when this has taken over as more predominant. But if you go out and do surveys, still, thankfully, it's very close, but a majority of people in America still believe that we were created, that there's an intelligent designer, and that we did not get here by random mutation and natural selection. That's still a predominant majority view of American citizens. Praise God. Let's look at some more of this blind faith. Now, this is one of the most stunning examples. George Wald, again, he's a professor. He writes the books. He's in evolution. He wrote a book called The Origin of Life. He says this: most modern biologists, having reviewed with satisfaction the downfall of the spontaneous generation hypothesis, that's where life spontaneously jumped into existence out of just nothing, out of a primordial soup, right? So he's saying all biologists now are saying, oh, this is not happening. This is this downfall. Yet, watch, unwilling to accept the alternative belief in special creation, are left with nothing. Watch what he does. I think a scientist has no choice but to approach the origin of life through a hypothesis of spontaneous generation. What? What did he just do? Okay? All he did was, I don't like the alternative theory of intelligent design or special creation, or that God or a designer had something to do with life here on Earth, or any of that. So he says, what does a scientist? We have no choice. What do? We stick on blind faith and believe in spontaneous generation. Okay, that's like middle school, right? Do you guys remember being on the middle school playground or elementary school playground where all of a sudden there was this geeky kid who was kind of logical, and he started to win an argument? And what does the bully do? He shoots them down and starts yelling and going, you're just an idiot, so hang on a second. This is not science. Okay, this is blind faith in Darwinian evolution, in this case, spontaneous generation. So what you see with the Progenote theory, that's this incredibly important theory and hypothesis, and absolutely central to Darwinian evolution on this planet. This completely blows the whole thing up. It is totally impossible for life to have come from non-life. And this is scientifically proven this way. And yet, you don't hear this at all. Even if hints of it, in schools or museums in our culture today. So that's one huge issue with the Progenote theory. Just ask anybody who starts hammering you about, Darwinian evolution, or your belief in creation, or belief in intelligent design. Ask them one question. Just remember this question. Hey, show me all the evidence for the Progenote theory. Ask the one question, and then have on hand our quick reference sheet. Remember, you can go to preparetheway.us, preparetheway.us like United States, and I've got a download section. Download this sheet called The Religion of Darwinian Evolution. It's a double-sided sheet. It has all these quotes on it, and you could quote to them George Wald. You could quote to them Sir Frederick Hoyle, or all these different quotes. You can say, are you aware that the highest level Darwinian evolutionists don't believe, that this is a reality? And then read Wald or George Wald or any of these people. Very powerful to have those, okay? Let's move into transitional species. Huge gaping problem with Darwinian evolution is there's a complete lack of transitional species in the fossil record. Now let's go back to Charles Darwin himself in The Origin of Species. By the way, Charles Darwin was a flaming racist. So the whole title of his book was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, comma, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Are you aware that Darwin thought that white people were more evolved than black people and other people of color? Darwin thought that it was Caucasians who were much more intelligent, much more evolved, and he was a stunningly systemic racist. And what you see is Hitler and other eugenics people like Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a devout believer in Darwinian evolution because they said that this showed that white people were more evolved than black people or other people, and that the people lower on the evolutionary chain should be left out of replicating pools so we can advance this gene pool. So really stunning. Read the writings of Hitler, Margaret Sanger, and others who completely agreed with Charles Darwin in this concept of that they were more evolved. Watch. I digress though. Let's get back to here. So, transitional species. Darwin himself said this: so must the number of intermediate varieties, those are transitional species, which have formerly existed be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological forum and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against my theory. Darwin himself is saying, if you don't see intermediate species, transitional species between these evolving, animals and life forms, then his theory is bogus. His whole theory is bogus. And yet, why do we not talk about this lack of transitional? What's he saying? What he's saying, let me break it down here. This gets a little complex. I'm going to boil it down and simplify it. What he's saying is, you've got hippos, you've got whales. And you see hippos, what they say is hippos, transitioned between whales and hippos. There was the transition, right? And so what we should be seeing is, if this actually happened, you should see these hippos with shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter legs, right? And you should see the snout on their nose getting further and further and further and further back, transitioning to whales, where all of a sudden when they transition and become a fully, mammal that lives in the ocean, they end up being the whale. And what you'll have people saying, oh, look, here's the former, hip bones of what used to be a hippo-like creature. And so what is Darwin saying? When you dig down in the fossil record, when you dig into the earth, you see fossils of hippos, and a previous creature would be a hippo-like creature, and whales. But what you don't see, he's saying, in his time, in the 1800s, he's saying there's no transitional species between hippos and whales. And he says this is a huge problem, right? Well, it's still a huge problem. Why? Because we're not seeing the transitional species. You should see hundreds and even thousands of these strange creatures that were, these meldings between hippos and whales, but you don't find that. And look at what Bowler Peter said: we cannot identify ancestors or missing links, and we cannot devise testable theories to explain how particular episodes of evolution came about. So he's talking about these other people. He's coming up with how the dinosaurs went extinct and how humans evolved from apes are just products of our imagination, driven by prejudices and preconceptions. Even the highest level evolutionists like Bowler here in 1999, are being honest about it. How about Stephen Jay Gould, famous Marxist professor from Harvard? Dr. Stephen Gould said this: the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary species has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. Okay, so he's kind of begrudgingly admitting this. At least he's admitting it, right? Look at David Raup. He was a Field Museum of Natural History. He was the director for it. Look what he says. We are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species. but the situation hasn't changed much. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. So he's saying in Darwin's time, they thought that a hippo, for example, was a transitionary species. But now we understand they're not a transitionary species. They're a fully formed life form that goes all the way back in the fossil record. And so they're not transitional species. So Raupp's admitting that at least. Dr. Colin Patterson said this: I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil. This is a biological evolutionist professor admitting the fact that there's no transitional species out there. So, what's my point? I'm quoting to you the highest level evolutionary biologists and paleontologists, and even them, they are saying, no, there's not transitional species out there, and it's a huge issue with Darwinian evolution. So that's transitional species. Finally, let's talk about irreducibly complex systems. Darwin said, let's go back to Darwin again. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Again, at least we have Darwin being honest, right? If you can, what's he saying? If you can look at, any organ, that's any system, so like in a human being, an eye, or the clotting mechanism within our blood system, he would say, if you cannot show how that happened through successive slight modifications, his theory falls apart. It's toast. So let's look into this. Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. This is my one quote from a non-Darwinian evolutionist. Michael Behe says this: by irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the whole system to effectively cease functioning. An irreducibly complex system cannot be produced directly by slight successive modifications of a precursor system. So what are some of these systems? Well, look at this. Bacterial flagella. We talked about that in that the scientists, the Darwinian evolutionists say it was a single-celled bacterium. Well, how did it move around? Well, it moved around with this bacterial flagella they submit. Well, look at this thing. It is absolutely amazing. In Darwin's time, they had no idea how complex life was. Darwin thought life was so simple. In fact, let me digress here for a moment, important point. In Darwin's time, they thought life was spontaneously generating all the time. In fact, they did a ridiculous scientific experiment, was not very scientific at all. What they did is they took a piece of meat and they stuck it in a room and they watched it, they observed it over time. Okay, they would come in and they'd look at the piece of meat, it hasn't changed, it's kind of getting moldy and gross, it hasn't changed. And then they would come in and they would say, look, there's little tiny larvae coming out of the meat. And they literally said in Darwin's time, spontaneous generation, life just spontaneous generated in that meat. The larvae would come out, it would wiggle around, and many days later, all of a sudden, what would come out of that larva? A fly. A fly would come out and it would fly around. They say, see, it's evolving before our very eyes. We see spontaneous generation happening all the time. Okay. So somebody who was an actual scientist came along and said, guys, that's a total stupid experiment. And he stuck a glass lid over it and said, now let's see if your life spontaneously generates, right? And of course it did, and the thing just molded away. Because they missed the fly coming and laying its egg in the meat. They didn't see that part. And then the larva coming out. So here's my point. In Darwin's time, they thought that life was spontaneously generating all around us because they thought that life was so simple and so easy to create that it would have spontaneously generated all the time. Now we know, and it's getting more and more and more, every single discovery when you have these electron microscopes and these, we're finally getting down into the DNA, you're seeing life does not spontaneously generate. It's incredibly complex. So now with the use of electron microscopes, we can see the stunning complexity of even the single-celled bacterium, which is supposed to be the simplest life form. You see every flagella has a hook, it has a stator, it has a rotor, it has, all of these pieces of it that look exactly like an engine, like a rotor, stator, and a motor. It looks just like a motor with bearing even inside of it. It's really amazing. So what's the point here? If I took the bearing out of the bacterial flagella, how well would that work? You're done. It won't work, right? Or if you take the rotor out, or the stator, or the hook, or the flagella filament, or the outer membrane, or any of these pieces, the whole system breaks down. That's an irreducibly complex system. Let's consider the eye, right? Even more complex. You've got the lens and the cornea and the pupil and the iris and the optical disc and the lens sac and you can go retina and all these, the optical nerve, all of these different parts of the eye. And in fact, Darwin said, when I look at the eye, I tremble, because he's like, that my theory breaks down when I consider that. So take any one of these things out. What happens? You're blind, right? The whole system breaks down. So how do you show through Darwinian evolution, which is random mutation and natural selection? Let's go to a living organism which has no eye, right? So what is the purpose of creating this energy into the system to make a jelly-filled sac? And then maybe stick an optical nerve off the back of this jelly-filled sac, but it's not really doing anything still. So this is the point. This is irreducibly complex, and it causes this concept of Darwinian evolution, the whole theory, to totally break down. So not only is there a huge issue with the progenote theory, right? There's no evidence for that. In fact, the evidence for the progenote theory disproves it. It shows that it's impossible for life to come from non-life. Transitional species, there are none. And the evidence for transitional species proves that Darwinian theory is a bogus one. There aren't transitional species out there, just fully formed species right from the get-go. And thirdly, irreducible complexity. Really, those three things are death knells for Darwinian evolution, but you've probably never heard of that. Again, get our document, The Religion of Darwinian Evolution. It has a lot of these quotes in it. Now I want to get into kind of some of this anti-Christian propaganda that many of these Darwinian evolutionists have, and probably the leading spokesperson for that is Dr. Richard Dawkins. Consider some of his quotes, right? He said, "It's time to question the abuse of childhood innocence with superstitious ideas of hellfire and damnation. And I want to show how the scriptural roots of the Judeo-Christian moral edifice are cruel and brutish. When it comes to children, I think of religion as a dangerous virus." What? Right? And then how about this one? "It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet someone who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not think of that or consider that." So this is Richard Dawkins, who says these things publicly, but yet what does he really believe? So watch this video here of Dawkins where he actually says that he believes in intelligent design.
What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
Well,
but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Isn't that amazing? So you've got, by the way, if you've never watched this movie, get the movie. It's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And how amazing is this? This movie was not done by some Bible-believing Christian person. It was done by Ben Stein, right? You know, a secular Jewish person who believes in God, for sure, but he's not a born-again, Christian. And so he comes out with this movie and shows the stunning hypocrisy in Richard Dawkins, who can slam intelligent design and rip on it and make you actually think that you're doing child abuse if you believe in intelligent design. It's stunning. And yet, he believes in intelligent design, but remember, he says, oh, it's an intelligent alien life form that panspermia, deposited the life form here on Earth. So that's his intelligent design. But do you guys get this? If you believe that in an alien life form that put the life here, well, where did the alien life form evolve from, right? It just pushes it out, and there's not enough time in the whole history of the universe for any of this to happen. So it's really important to understand that. And here's some more propaganda. I want to show you this. Mark Singham, Teaching and Propaganda in Physics Today. He says this, and I use that trust, the trust of students, to effectively brainwash them. Our teaching methods are primarily those of propaganda. We appeal without demonstration to evidence that supports our position. We only introduce arguments and evidence that supports the currently accepted theories and omit or gloss over any evidence to the contrary. So there's the tactics, right? Now I want to get in. This is a very important section. And in the textbooks, right, you have this supposed critical thinking here in the textbooks. This is an actual textbook used in our high school today. Douglas Futima, Evolutionary Biology. He says this, evolution is not a theory, it's a fact. As fully as the fact of the Earth's revolution about the sun, like the heliocentric solar system, evolution began as a hypothesis and achieved facthood as the evidence in its favor became so strong that no knowledgeable and unbiased person could deny its reality. Okay, that's a strong statement, right? As we've just seen the evidence for all this. Here's another one in the textbooks. Dr. Richard Lewontin. Again, this guy's a PhD from the highest level schools in evolutionary biology. He says this, evolution is fact, not theory. Birds arose from non-birds and humans from non-humans. No person who pretends to any understanding of the natural world can deny these facts any more than she or he can deny that the earth is round, rotates on its axis, and revolves around the sun. Okay, again, you're an idiot if you don't believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution. But does Richard Lewontin really believe it? He'll make you think you believe it. Watch what else Richard Lewontin wrote. He said this, we take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, that's you and me he's talking to. Moreover, that materialism is an absolute. Why? Here's the agenda. Here's the hypocrisy. For we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Stunning hypocrisy at the highest level of these evolutionary biologists. They admit that the data is not pointing towards naturalistic Darwinian evolution. In fact, he says it's absurd to think that. It's counterintuitive. This is mystifying, right? And yet we believe it. Why? There's the agenda. We cannot believe in special creation, as George Wald said. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door, as Richard Lewontin. That's the agenda. They don't like God. and they want God out of it. So why promote open discussion? Well, it's good science, right? Of course you want to talk about alternative theories to how we got here and not just, spoon feed and indoctrinate people into thinking that this failed theory is really a successful theory. It's not, it's a failed theory. I just met someone, by the way. This is still happening in our public school system today, right here, right? I'm not going to name which high school, but there are high school teachers who are saying to their classes every year, Darwinian evolution is a failed theory. There's no evidence for it. I'll teach it because you need to understand it. You know how to refute it. I believe in creation. He says that to his class every single year. So there are amazingly great teachers in our public school system still teaching a balanced and accurate curriculum today. I just want to encourage you on that. And more if you want to get our book, Navigating Public Schools. If you're in the public school system, know how to navigate that well. Look at our website, preparetheway.us, like United States. Look for Navigating Public Schools. I'll send you a book for free if you shoot me an email. So it's good science. We should promote open discussion. We shouldn't shut down discussion just because that doesn't align with your worldview. We should care about the truth. It encourages children to think critically, and an evolution-only curriculum often shames children who believe in a creator. I want to tell you a story. Remember, I was an atheist. If you hadn't seen my testimony, go back to the first one, The Reliability of the Bible. I share my testimony. I was an atheist for 34 years, and so I started my teaching career as an atheist, and I'm teaching in 6th grade, I'm teaching Darwinian evolution, right? So I remember this so clearly. There's one class, and I'm teaching, look, here's the transitional species. They're all right there. You got Lucy, right? You got Homo habilis, Homo sapien, Homo erectus. You can see all of these transitions, right? How they happened. Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. Here's the transitional species. It's proven, Darwinian evolution, right? And just this arrogance. And I didn't know what I was talking about. And you know what? I want to encourage every one of you. Like I said it in the worldview battle session, we're not battling people. I want you guys to hear this. The worldview battle that we're in is what we've talked about before. What's it a battle of? Are we battling people? Are we battling schools? Are we battling government? No. What are we battling? The worldview. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5, we're battling the arguments and the pretensions that set themselves up against the knowledge of God and against a biblical worldview. That's the worldview battle that's raging around us. So we are not battling people. People are our mission field. So what I want to encourage you to do is you're not doing this to win an argument again. You're doing this to try to bring truth and be a light for Christ and help lead someone to a saving knowledge of the truth. But going back to the story, I'm sitting there in this classroom, and this 11-year-old boy, 6th grader, raises his hand kind of tentatively, but very courageously for him, and he says, Mr. Williams, well, isn't that just one theory of how we got here? Isn't there another theory like creation? And what did I do? I said, no, this is proven fact. Creationism and intelligent design are wrong. And now I've repented of that because I don't want to be a stumbling block to kids. And I actually tried to reach out to him. I haven't been able to find him. But I've repented of that. And the point of this is not to start attacking teachers or people who believe it. Why? Because I would say 95% of the people who teach Darwinian evolution as dogmatic fact really believe it is. They believe that their evidence supports it. So you got a huge mission field, people. You've got 95% of people who believe this stunningly easy to refute thing that Darwinian evolution is proven fact. Here's these quotes, right? Here's the data. Go over the data points. You got 95 now. I think the other 5% have an ulterior, evil, malicious motive, where they hate God, and like Lewontin and like Richard Dawkins and others, where they want to they don't care about the evidence. All they're doing is try to thwart people's faith. So we're battling the worldview, and I would say the vast majority of people who really dogmatically believe Darwinian evolution have just been deceived. So help wake them up, get into some cool conversations. Skeptics are speaking out. Right? There's a whole website, dissentfromdarwin.org. It says this: we are skeptical of the claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian evolution should be encouraged. Simple statement, right? But they're trying to put this on a textbook, and we've had previous Supreme Court strike it down. I believe we've got 5 justices right now who will overturn this and put these statements onto textbooks now in the public school system. Look at some of these professors and PhDs. So there are massively high level of science who are signing that statement, from, professor of chemistry. These are the highest level PhDs and professors that are signing on to this. Hey, who's that last person there? That's my crazy brainiac wife, Sarah. So she's got the PhD from Stanford, and notice the spelling there. In environmental microbiology. But look at this list of PhDs, right? It's growing and growing. Over 1,000 of the highest level scientists from around the globe are signing on to this. So look, I believe in our generation, you're going to see the theory of Darwinian evolution come crashing down. Because as evidence, as this information comes out, and as you all get some of this information and start engaging with people, you're going to be able to help encourage them. There's some great books. Lee Strobel wrote a book, The Case for a Creator, probably one of the best books. It covers all of this stuff. It's overarching, and yet it's absolutely brilliant. So The Case for a Creator is outstanding. But here's Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box, Jonathan Wells' Icons of Evolution. Great, brilliant PhDs and scientists and apologists, Lee Strobel, giving you materials that will help you. Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. Why? So that men are without excuse. The heavens declare the glory of God. Remember, I say this at the end of each of my sections, don't camp out in irreducible complexity. You don't just try to win an argument. This is not trying to win an argument. We're not going to argue someone into the kingdom. The point of this information is that we can build a bridge strong enough to hold truth on, and we can point out to mainly those 95% of people who have just been deceived. Darwinian evolution is a failed theory, and I want to show you how intelligent design has way more evidence for it, for example. But don't camp out there. Get it back to the gospel, right? Here's the questions. What do you think about Jesus? Who do you think Jesus was? What do you think about the Bible? Remember, find those myths that they have believed about the Bible or about Jesus, and get that conversation back to those gospel-centric talks, and then follow up. Get a book, email someone, and hey, you don't need to be a know-it-all. No one knows it all, right? And so we need to be humble as we say, hey, I don't know how to answer that question. Can I research it with you? And then who's going to say, no, I don't want to research it with you, if they're dialoguing. So research it with them, and you're going to find the truth. The truth is going to set them free, but there's going to be a truth that leads them to, there's a massive amount of evidence showing that God is the creator. Again, check out our book, Navigating Public Schools. Check out our curriculum. In this, I've got the 4 DVD set with the accompanying curriculum booklet with all of these talks on it. And if you feel led, we'd love it if you'd partner with us. Join our email list. I would love to come and speak. I speak all over the United States. I'd love to come to your church or organization or small group. And if you feel that we're a worthy ministry, we'd love a donation. You can go to preparetheway.us. You can text give there on that number. But would love your feedback on this talk. So I pray that the Lord would use this for his glory and help you to speak the truth in love to people, many people who have been deceived by this topic of science and Christianity. May God bless you.